So I'm Suzanne Conklin Akbari, and it's my pleasure, and I'm very grateful to be here as a helper for the third annual Munsee Story Evening. The title of this gathering is neekaawa, KIHTAACHIIMUWAK, WULAAKWUNUWII. This evening they tell stories. And I also want to remember to thank those who have helped to set things up today, the Zoom and all the practical arrangements, especially Maria Mercedes Tuya and Melissa Morton. This is our third annual story night. It began in 2022, where there were stories shared by language keeper and language teacher Karen Moscow, who's much missed by her friends, family, and community, who shared stories along with Ian McCallum. In the second year, in 2023, Ian shared stories together with the illustrator Catherine Chupa-Call. And this year, in 2024, I'm really happy that we have storytellers both from Munsee-Delaware Nation and from Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit, or Delaware Nation at Moraviantown. There's going to be Ian McCallum, Velma Noah Nicholas, and Kristin Jacobs, along with illustrator Ella Johnston. And there are many Lunaapeewak and friends among those listening and sharing tonight. And I'm especially happy that here is Maaliish Miller from the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, who will be maybe adding some commentary after the stories this evening. The recordings of past year's story night are available on the IAS's Lunaape events webpage, which we'll put in the chat. We're recording this evening's story sharing as well, and if the language keepers decide that they would like to, these will also be added to the webpage. So without any further delay, let me please ask Ian to start things off. Anishik.
Anishik, Suzanne, much appreciated and much appreciated to share space with the wonderful speakers here as well as the wonderful artists. So thanks again for the invite to come back. And welcome everyone to the Munsee-Delaware Story Evening, the third annual. And it's my duty to start off in terms of the story sharing. And this sort of came about because I was double booked this evening with girls volleyball in Aurelia, but it's a family day weekend here in Ontario. So we got a Monday off, much as I believe you have a Monday off down there as well for President's Day. So it all worked out in the end. So I'll continue with no delay here. This story was touched upon last year, was introduced in terms of just a conversation about how the translation process was going. So I have the pleasure of sharing a bit more of this story this evening as it's becoming, as it's progressing to being complete. And the story is called the Kiss of the First Snow. And this is a story that was given by the Nicholas family of Munsee-Delaware Nation. And I'm pleased to have with me Ella Johnston, who's a member of the Munsee-Delaware Nation as well, who is going to be sharing the artistic process of illustrating this story. To provide a little bit of context, the Kiss of the First Snow originally came out of our online Lenape language classes, which Karen and I hosted from 2020 to 2022. And in those classes, many Munsee people from south of the lakes were able to join in, and three members of the Nicholas family were able to join in, and they learned the language along with Karen and I teaching the language. And at the end of that time with those language classes, and I think it was actually the first story night or potentially the second one, John Nicholas decided that he wanted to see if I could translate a story. And I didn't ask a whole lot about it because I felt quite honored in that John would reach out. Based on the stories that I shared from my family, the Logan family of Munsee-Delaware, I felt really honored that John would reach out. Little did I realize that John was handing me a 10-page story, which is a bit of a challenge, especially if you're not a first language speaker, not a second language speaker. So it's a bit like being asked, to do 10 pages of French, which I think I could do a lot easier. It's going to take some time. And this all sort of encapsulated what I think I was trying to do by sharing family stories, was that there's a lot of stories in the community, and they're often related in English, or parts of them are related in Munsee. And I thought, if there's any way in which I could translate stories for other families into the language as best I could, I thought maybe we're doing that repatriation, that reconciliation process that we describe here in Canada. taking something that came from Munsee speakers, had to be recorded in English because of the state of the language, and then brought back into the language. And I thought, in a small way, what we're doing here is we're actually reconciling between the languages here in Ontario and Canada, at least, and doing a good thing by bringing those stories back into the proper language. So as a yearly goal of translating and recording Munsee-Delaware community stories, if there were stories that people would like translated, I sort of put my own personal work aside in terms of language and tried to sort of increase my own abilities with the language to translate these stories. It's taken the better part of 2 years to translate a 10-page story. I think maybe I've got to do a better job in the future in terms of outlining exactly what I'm capable of doing. But in the end, it was completed in December of 2023. And as soon as I typed the last word, I wanted to just the balloons and the streamer should have come down from the roof, but there wasn't any. And I was like, who do I tell? I got to tell someone who's finished 10 pages of translation of the Munsee language, but it was just me and the cat. So the cat got to hear about it, but it's only after that I've been able to share this sort of this mini Everest in terms of language translation. I was fortunate enough to win a grant with the United Way of Middlesex Elgin County, which is in southwestern Ontario, to record and illustrate and create short films regarding community story. So all of the community stories from previous years here at the Princeton IAS evening have now been illustrated, but they've also been filmed. So learners will be able to get to hear the language both in English and in Munsee, but they're actually illustrated stories as well. And that's where I've got to meet Ella Johnston, who's here this evening, and she'll share her interpretation of the story through visual. A little bit about the translation process. As many of you may know, if you've taken part in any Indigenous language work, the Munsee Lenape Delaware language is a very descriptive language, meaning oftentimes you can get away with less words than you would in English to describe the same thing. But for a second language speaker and a learner, this is sort of the process in which I approached John's story. So I identified any nouns in the sentence, which probably goes back to me having to learn French, right? Look for words that you can identify quite easily. That way I can translate or start to get the gist of what the Delaware sentence is going to look like. Identify any subjects or verbs, and what I'll do there is I'll try to conjugate those as well. That was a part that I struggled with in the French language. I wasn't very, very good with my conjugations. I look at a piece of writing in English and go, okay, how is this going to be a challenge for me to translate into Munsee? Because English can sometimes get very wordy in the way that we write or the way that we speak, in ways that perhaps the Munsee language is not going to be an easy translation. Then I sort of delve into the world of, can I look for synonyms for words that aren't going to be present? Can I rewrite the sentence into something that is less English while staying true to the actual story? Then I go back to my sources. So I'll review with Mr. O'Meara's dictionary. The work of Ives Goddard has been very helpful. And also we have a curriculum guidebook here in Ontario that helps teachers of the Lenape language break down sentences. So I can also use that grammar text. The other piece that's really important is everybody needs a break. And sometimes rather than get so frustrated and mark up my computer with highlighter, I'll just leave that sentence and go on to the next one. And it's a practice that we teach, students in school. If you're having difficulty with this problem, go on to the next one, and hopefully you can come back to it if time allows at the end. Pardon me, I've got to close my window here. So there we go. So here's an example. And I've not necessarily shared this in the past, so I thought this might be interesting this evening. This translation, this is a simple sentence of the story. So in terms of an English, in terms of reading it in English, but as time went And as beautiful as it was, the creatures found it pretty tiresome to wake up time after time in a world that never changed. And from an English standpoint, that looks fairly simple. But for someone who's trying to translate that, there's some fairly English wordy things going on here. So, but as time went on, the term went, the term to go, may be misconstrued when I translate that into Munsee. The word for creatures means in English everything, right? So that may require me to extend the sentence to describe creatures. We use the thing time after time. It's sort of an expression in English, right? Time after time. Cyndi Lauper sang it time after time, but it's not necessarily very helpful in Lenape, and I'm not sure, although I translated it as such, that people would have said it like that. The other part that's tricky is world. Aki is earth, but I'm not sure if there's a word for world. So there had to be a way to get around that piece. So what I've taken there is the sentence that John recorded in his story, and now I've had to include workarounds to make sure that the original meaning of the sentence is there. So I did include lapi, waak lapi, which is time after time. I guess I could use that for Cyndi Lauper as well. As instead of when time went on, I used this expression as just sakilowit, which means as time goes by, I think it was. The part before I read, I have to acknowledge a couple of things. One is that I have a second language voice, which means that you're going to be missing some things. But it does allow me to consider some key pieces when it comes to my second language learning and how I'm going to improve as a speaker. Things that I'm going to think about is the fluency and the orality in which I speak. So, what's my fluency rate, my punctuation, my tone, and my flow. When I speak in English, my voice varies. It goes up and down because that's my first language. When I speak in French, it's less so, but I still understand the whole notion of tone and flow of a sentence. With the Munsee language, I'm going to argue that I'm not there yet, so that my recording of the Munsee language is very monotone and without that emotion that you would expect from a first language speaker. I will employ some problem solving into vocabulary that I've not used very often or seen. And that's oftentimes what we use in English or when we're trying to learn a second language, is that we'll go back and repeat a word, or we will go back to accent properly where the long vowel is or the short vowel is. And there are Munsee rules and there's English rules. And when you work in English for 99.999% of your time, oftentimes you will miss out on those specific Munsee rules, especially when it comes to the short vowels, the use of the letter X, or the exclamation on the second set of double vowels in a word. All of these things, I'm going to give myself a break though, and I always share with those who are learners, that we should do this as well. That people are shy when they speak in their own first language, not alone choosing to speak in a second language. There's this fair bit of anxiety as well when you're in front of a large group, whether you're online. It's 56 people now, so I should be fairly anxious. But when we speak in front of groups or speak in front of those that might be better speakers, we get some anxiety. We're afraid of judgment. We're also afraid that we're going to go against the rules, that perhaps we're not saying something as the way it should be. There's a piece that I am working towards, and that's conversing in a second language and having the stamina in reading a second language, because oftentimes I get tired. Just as I do when I translate, I need a break. It's almost like I need a break just to clear my mind, and then I can come back. It's the same way in conversing in a second language, that I need to be able to build up that stamina. So instead of, talking in 10 minutes in English on story night, I talk for 10 minutes in the Munsee language. We do have the historical trauma of being and speaking and what's that meant for different generations. So that refers directly to the residential schools in which the language was banned, but that also includes the 60s scoop and other pieces where, just meaning speaking the language would center you out as someone who's not speaking the two main languages here in Canada, which is English and French. Therefore, in 2024, I always encourage my learners to speak, read, and hear the language. It's a strength. And with that, it's political because you are choosing to give power to your Indigenous language, the language of your people. And with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share parts of John's story. I don't want to give it all away because the story is yet to be published, and we got to find a way to bring you back next year. So this is excerpts from The Kiss of the First Snow. I'm not going to read the English. The English is very clear on the slide, so I'm going to concentrate on the Munsee language, much as my colleagues online are. So here goes. Lawate and Aki West Seat. Chachpanak Wasowat Wag Pashiki Tali. Lawate Iasqua Nikitakwat Atmobila Nashilat Machine Wak Shuk Ishkwik Kishkwet Shachan Shihsuwanakuw. And the taskbar is right over the last sentence. Here we go. Lunaapeewak Wikawat Shukmata Kwali Wak Neekaawa Chachpanak Wasowat Alawi Kwaikishkwik. Wama awayayusag wingalawa sowa. Kishok yani wasalachin wak yani alume wak kalewi. Shuksaka loit wak pishka tale. Wama wang kishawalomwa okilat lapi wak mata tachpanak wasitit. As kishkwik wak tlak walak. Oh, I missed a page. I apologize. Sorry, I missed the second page. Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit awayayusag kasino wak at KIHTAACHIIMUWAK neekaawa hweli polanisawa. Gwittanum laachumohkawaatwak. Mata wasikan wak mata nipahampastak. Layi mata pishkak. And it is with my pleasure to pass the virtual microphone over to my colleague in this story, Ella Johnston, to describe the artistic process. Maaliish.
Nishik Ian. So I'm in the middle of illustrating this story with Ian. The first photo you see is one of the last scenes in the story. I'm still in the middle of it, so it's just a sketch. And there should be on the next slide or more closer to the finished copy. Maybe. Yeah. So the process, we started with a storyboard where me and Ian and some of the other people who were working on the story, we did a written descriptive storyboard. We blocked out the story and picked what parts we found important or that we felt needed to be illustrated. And then I did a visual storyboard. Then the visual storyboard turned into the sketches and final drawings. Material-wise, I went with painting because I felt like it fit the story better. And this one, first thing that came to mind was the perspective I did it in. I wanted to do a bird's eye view so you could see the wind and the snow, the creatures, and then if you can see, there's a face in the wind, which is supposed to represent the creator. And there should be another slide as well. This is one of the final, I think, second to last one in the story. This one, I really want to focus on the window more than anything. And if you go to the next slide, it should be closer to finished copy. For these ones, I chose a lot of red to represent the people. So they all have red surrounding them, or they're wearing red. Just kind of differentiate those scenes from the ones with the creatures. And yeah, that's kind of it. Anishik?
Anishik, Ella. And then Suzanne, shall I pass it over to Velma, and then we're doing questions at the end, is that right?
I should have said a little earlier, I thought maybe what
Okay.
might work well, if it's okay with you, if people have a couple of questions or a couple of thoughts or any ways you might like to respond to one another, we could take a couple minutes for that and then go on. And then at the end, there'll be some additional time for shared conversation, if that sounds good. If
Sure.
anybody has a question, maybe they could raise their hand or else put it in the chat or say that they'd like to ask something in the chat. And Ian, in the meantime, Ian, I don't know if you have a comment on what it's been like to work together with Ella and any other collaborators on bringing the visual element of the stories out. It must be a really interesting process.
Yeah, I've approached the family stories that we've had, in that I don't really have, I have very limited artistic talent. But I also don't have any preconceived notion what the story looks like. A few of them I did, because of course I lived through a couple of those stories that were previously written. But for the story that John asked us to translate, I had never seen this story whatsoever. So translating through it, I've got an idea of what I think it could look like, but I have not the capabilities to actually see that through. So whereas as Ella's and one of her, the picture previous, I'll bring that back up because I do this one. So I actually kind of wanted a frame version of this one because I really like this. I can, having translated, I can see the wind blowing through the trees. That's a very key part of the story, and also the animals starting to get together to attack the problem that they've been given. And this piece from the perspective from up above wasn't something I was expecting, and so it really brings, I think that really it enlightens the story. If that's the right word, probably a better word. It's a way of interpreting the story that I wasn't looking at it from this angle, right? You're looking at it from ground level as opposed to from above. I think this piece here really does the story justice.
Nishi, Ian, and I was just thinking about, as you were saying, how the perspective of this painting is really striking, how neat it is how you and Ella are both, again, from the same community as the Nicholas family, all sharing your different perspectives on this story coming out of the community. In the chat, there's been some lovely comments. Vanessa Dion Fletcher had said, beautiful paintings. And Rhonda Balouse had said, I want to acknowledge how beautiful this is, the process, the story, and the artistic contribution. And Sherry Huff had said, beautiful to hear the language and see the images from Ella. Melissa Morton had a question. She said, Ella, your drawings are beautiful. Are you using watercolor, and how large are the paintings?
Yeah, so they are in watercolor and they're 15 by 11 inches.
If there are not any other questions or comments right now, maybe we could go on to Velma's sharing of a story or sharing of the language, and then there'll be time for discussions and questions later.
So this book is about giving thanks. So it talks about creation. I'm not going to tell you what it means because I want you guys to just hear it There's no English translation, so maybe we can talk about that later. But I just want you to listen and enjoy what you see and what you hear. Namohwa lindaminen el pamausieng wakanam halawana wemakwak milayeng kukana aki ganam halalona el milkayeng wemakwak katatameng. Anishik olikak kwan pakwak pakak wiwani kasian kukana aki alki ktaliton winj wema pamausitit ma katos muitit. Ganam halalona whiskey huskwal walamamokwak akwi kasitna wak al patawan tahak kukana aki. Anishik wanji kungil kukana aki al nonj pamausinan wak wala tanamina ma kato kuyang. Ati tackle ganam halalona al wulapamoksian wak shokalipoksian. No la lindaminan wichapik gika kalkwang winamosiang. Anishik wema awayayasik pama kamiyak al pili tak kopio wak wema mitkwak pama kamiyak. No la lindaminan el akchitak wak kishiwak milayang. Anishik awala shoshak pamakamiyak el naxpii walak alalamwing winj wema awan wing chachin. Ganam halalona nawano watachanachan el patawiyang hilik lachawan winj kung lachayang winj nawano alochayon. Anishik patakwik namo Anishik patakwik namo homas el patawan sokalan quichimawak wema pamausitit wulahtanamit inawa. Nachisamis kishok ganam halalona al wasalanaminan wak al kishawinaw kukana aki. Anishik noham nipaham al wicho wikayan ash kishok wak al wasalanamayan ami menzik pachkananga wak wasalachen bio. Ganam halalona wasalang wawak al wilituan piskawani willet wak al sokalinda aki hengo. Minatowak sasa ki hatit lawatawak by ganam halalona al lohamawinan wenchkung walausiang. Shokaloi anishikichi minato almiliang wama walik minato wakano wanjish walahtanamiang walamalisiang ash wapang wak ash piskak. Nishik.
Nishik, Velma. People may have some comments and questions to share. And in the meantime, Velma, I wonder if you'd like to talk a little bit about the prayer and the ways, how can I put it, your knowledge of it and what led you to share it with the group, and maybe a little bit about the language in the prayer and why it's important.
When I first started in language, I think it was probably in 2005 is when I actually found the book. So you can I don't know if you can see it or not, but you can purchase this book. But I chose it because we need to do this. We need to show thanksgiving for everything in creation, and to take the time to acknowledge everything from, you know, from the bottom all the way up to the beings. And it was, you know, it's something that our people have done for years. Like when we talk about the stories from wampum belts, and they're all connected, so they too talk about the relationship with creation. And that's the beginning of us is the creation story. So we need to take the time to acknowledge um, all of those things, and to know all of those things, and to talk to all of those things in the language the best that we can. So I found that book in 2005, and at that time I was working with Diane Snake, and that's I asked her to translate that for me. And I can say most of it without reading it. So I've and I understand it. So that's my goal, is to be able to just say the whole Thanksgiving prayer, talk about all of creation, and then in addition add extra things within it, so that I don't forget. Because when Creator created us, He never left anything out. So in our Thanksgiving, we also shouldn't leave anything out. So, and it should.
Amazing, Velma. A number of people in the chat are saying thank you for what you've shared. Zephyr had asked if the book was available to read or buy anywhere. So maybe we might be able to, if anybody finds the link, maybe we could put that in the chat for sharing. Marina Marinelli said, I read this book in English to my class each year. I'd love to have a video of you reading this in Lenape, Velma. Thank you so much. Beautifully read. That's a really neat idea. I really appreciate that. Are there others who'd like to comment or ask some questions? One of the things that's in my mind, and perhaps some others might have it in their mind too, is the importance of the Thanksgiving prayer, and also the way in which it opens the door to language. I'm reminded of the ways in which the late Karen Moscow used to in language class, and I think people will also have this in mind, would always begin with a slightly different version of an opening prayer that enumerates creation. And that was a way to begin class, always in a good way. But also, there was always something new in terms of language. There was always something new to be noticed, whether you were brand new to it or whether it had been a little bit longer or someone was very experienced. So, so much was all nestled in that, like a nut or something like that, that grows into a big tree. And Melissa has added the link to the book in the chat. Would anyone like to unmute and comment or ask questions? Or is there anything you'd like to ask people to share, Velma? One of the people in the chat is asking about your own experience of language. Are you a native Munsee speaker? So that might open the conversation in a way that comes back to some of the comments Ian made. Ian talked quite a bit about being very much a second language Munsee speaker, or coming after English and French learning, English being his first language. I don't know if that's something you'd care to comment about a little bit as well.
Lenape is not my first language. My mom was a residential school survivor. But I did hear it as a little person, like 3 or 4 years old. I remember hearing it. And my grandmother and my grandparents actually were fluent speakers. So, but I wasn't raised with it. I didn't start to relearn it until I was probably about 30 years old. So, but hearing it as a younger child helped to pick it up quicker as a 30-year-old.
Would anyone else like to comment or share? If not, maybe we'll go on to Kristin's presentation, and then there could be some shared discussion.
Quinganawaloma, Loanakan Ochqued Shienzi, Kristin Jacobs, Nonjay Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit, and Week Chow Dummy Menzi. So I'm going to share a story called And a Pum Chatlayang Lake Hedge Golikon. And this is a story that I wrote in my 3rd year at the Lakehead second language teaching program. And in one of our courses, we had to write a short story. So At that point, we had been to Lakehead 2 summers, and those first 2 summers we flew to Lakehead, and then this third summer we decided that we were going to drive. So I wrote this story from the perspective of my 10-year-old son, Barry. Inishik to my Lenape language teacher, Diane Snake, and to my Lakehead language instructor, Dr. John O'Mara, for their guidance and help in completing this short story. I also have Inishik ni guk, Nakaguma Nuichumuk. Thank you to my mom. She's always helping me. Hashni Panoi and a Equi Shkolion, Dalamasina and a Kichi Pepetakwik. Nino hum alumso and a alokat gut kishok. Nashkahanjo Shnipuit and a sokalong de shinzi, Eelunaapeewi berry stonefish. Niha Eelunaapeewi wak wimbut den hiekdom. Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit no wunjyayuw wak dami Munsee wunjyayuw. Ni guk kuchi hilanikso, nakashinzo loanachen ochgwe, Eelunaape Kristin Jacobs. Ni guk hawa sheshko halawas. Nilona Dathna and a Kichi Pepetakwik le, Guk Shkolikon Au, Alkatanita Helenixit wak Akakingat. And a Amwawi Nipachum Gishiki, Iasqua Alumsiengua, Nilona Namawa Ali Anji Katamon, Nalzin, Lapich Knawalomwa, Ni Josamak wak Nikalangomatit. Ni guk duk, walaskanach tikal, achakwingo, maawehleewak sikil, wak pashapam bilak. Nuichmau na hismis Jacob, pipi na minol, maawehleewak sikil, ta alinakwakil katapatak. And a shayachan, ni lona alumi lahna. Nal and a nipong, and a kichi pepetakwik, dulchal lahna ich. Ni guk duk, ni shachkamau, Dilchala na ich. Shayawi Kishkwik and a Pum Chachlayang, Michigan Tele. Michigan Hotan Jikanang Atau. Gata Gila Kmart, Al Kahanayan, Khali Shilpil, Ali Angie Kataman. Namahlawawak ich, WWE, Quackchina Gasak. Pitat ich Namahlamin Quackwunj Jacob. Ni gukwak ni no ham neekaawa ahashta bum chalawak. Gutashta kalakika Sault Ste. Marie and a Ayang. Nal gukatatam pizzash dinalihna. Nilona jiwa sanihna. Ayaski dochki launa kita yapaya. Nal kishkwik dolchalahna kito taning tele. Naminal khali bisul sipol wakunawang gekil. Beni nawawak mitkwak wak ahasak. Ni gukam li tahau tasa a nawawana namuso wak machkwo. Ni lona guilachna wunj Nalahii mayangich. Ni wak Jacob gutach kilachna. Bisang dakbihna. Kwai kishkwik mocha awan yontele. Jacob washaipa malawiso. Gukwak noham pamisawak. Nalguilachna wawa, namitsina subway kwachmangtale, and ami minzak malawasitit, ni guk o, ki kamalawasimo ich nakash, nuingo sina ha, nilona gikawawana whiskey josamak, banakawa shkahanjoshak, nilona dalamasina wawa, niwak Jacob mo gawihna galangtale, ni doki wa guk kuchimolak, kteekhiikeew, iach li dahau tasa a nawawana namuso. Ni noham duk kteekhiikeew, nal guk wanawawa muso. Namus mitso mikgasko pamichi anang. Namus now kona wak pamata kilau kopi tele. Magutach kawiwi namuso. Wana piskeka wak guk o. Nilona wana and a kichi papa takwik batna. Nawau huchikawit lino. Nawawi ton wana and a kichi papa takwik batna. Nishash Takhakalakika Ayang, Nilona Jiwasani na Shuk Wala Namahla Michwakan, Nal Dulchalatna, Lakehedge Golikanang. Nawikina ich yontele, Winj Gut Kishok, Watma Guk Moish Golit. Ni ich dam ami minzui shkolikon and Anita Heleniksin, wa gatanawau hoi Josamak. Guk ich watamalokau nakash nilona yontele. Lapich wikayink Sandy Lake House. Jacob witapo mawel nochmo watama nilona shkolikanang dahna. And the permissiang whiskey wikayang, Jacob O. Maha nilona wikayang, gata noham wikit. Jacob mecha quilo mawo wama awan. Matani, nawawito nilona ich, nawingao sina watama yontele. Nawawiton al kahanayan, whiskey josamak wak gume dahna, Lake Helen and Amawa latit. Wakela ahwalak and kichi babatakwik. The end. So now I'll go back and kind of give you the translation of each of the slides. Okay, so Andapum Chatlayang is when we drove Lakehead School to Lakehead School or University. So Hashni Pinoe and Equishgolion. So every summer when school's done, we go to Thunder Bay, which is Andakichi Pepetakwik. And that means like where the big thunders are. Ninoham alumso and alokat gut kishok. So my grandma, she leaves work for 1 month. Nashkahanjo shnipuit and sokalang deshinzi. The little boy who stands in the rain is my name, or you can say Barry Stonefish. So that's Barry's spirit name. And he says, Niha Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit den. He says that I'm Lenape and I'm 10 years old. Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit wunjyayuw waak Munsee chow. So he's saying I'm from Delaware Nation and I'm Wolf Clan. Ni guk kuchi hilanikso. My mom wants to learn to speak Delaware. Her name, Nakashinzo Loanachen Okwe, her name is North Wind, or you can say Kristin Jacobs. Ni guk kawa sheshko halawas. My mom is a teacher. Nilona dachna and a kichi pepe takwikla. So when we go to Thunder Bay, guk shkolikon ao, my mom will go to school. Al katanita hilanik sitwak ekakingat, so that she can learn to speak her language and teach it. And amwawi ni pachum gishiki. So my birthday is in July. Iaskwa alum siangwa, before we leave. Nilona namawa lahna ali anji katamang. We gather for my birthday. Nalzin lapich knawaloma ni josamakwak ni kalangomati. I have to say goodbye to my friends and my family. Ni guk duk walaskanach dikel acha kwingle. So my mom tells me to pack clothes, Maaliish Miller or toys, walk pasha pumbilak, and bring some books. Nuichamau nachismus Jacob pipi naminal Maaliish Miller ta alinakwakil katapatak. So he's saying I help my little brother Jacob choose some toys, and whatever else that he wants to bring. And a shayachan nilona alumi lahna. So at first we flew. Nal and a nipung, so this summer, and kichi papa takwik dulcha lahnayach. So this summer we'll drive to Thunder Bay. Ni guk duk, my mom tells me, ni shachkamau dulcha lahnayach. It'll take 2 days to drive there. Shayawi Kishqueak and Pumchatlayan, Michigan Tele. So on the first day, we drive through Michigan. Michigan Huatanjikanang Ottawa. Michigan is in the United States. Gata Gila Kmart. I want to stop at Kmart. Al Kahanayan Huali Shilpil, because I have lots of money, Ali Anji Kataman, that I got from my birthday. Namahlawawak Ich WWE Quack Chinakasak. I'm gonna buy some WWE wrestlers. Pita Ich Namahlomin Quack Wunj Jacob. And maybe I'll buy something for Jacob. Ni gukwak ni noham nakawa ehashta bumchelawak. My mom and my grandma, they take turns driving. Gutashtachakalakika Sault Ste. Marie and Ayang. So we got to Sault Ste. Marie around at 6 p.m. Now guk katatum pizza dinalina. My mom gets pizza for dinner. Nilona jiwasanihna. We're all very tired. Ayaska doki lawana kitayapaya. We have to get up early in the morning. Now kishkwik dolchala na kito daning tile. So the next day we drive through Canada. Naminal Huali Bisel. I see lots of lakes, Sipowal are rivers, Wakwunawangekil, which are mountains. Beni Nawawak, Meetquakwak Ahasak. And I also see trees and crows. Nigukumli Tahau, Tasa Nawawana, Namusawak Makwal. My mom thinks we might see a moose or a bear. Nilona Guilachna Winj Alahi Mayangich. So we stopped to rest for a bit. Niwak Jacob Gataki Lachna. Me and Jacob start to run. Bisang Dapina. We're at a lake. And Kwaikishkwik Mocha Awanyon Tele. So on this day, it's very foggy. Jacob Washaipa Malawiso. Jacob's playing along the shore. Gukwak no Humpamisawak. And my mom and grandma are walking. Now, Guilachna Wawa, we stop in Wawa, Namitsina Subway, Quachmangtele, and Amiminzak Malawasiti. So we're eating Subway at a park. Niguk o Kik Malawasina Ich Nakash. My mom says you guys can play for a little while. Nwingao Sina, we have fun. Nilona Gis Gawawana Whiskey Josamak. We met new friends, Banakawa Shkahanjoshak, and they were little boys too. Nilona Dalamasina Wawa, sorry. We leave Wawa. Niwak Jacob Mo Gawihna Galang Tele. Me and Jacob fall asleep in the car. Ni Dohki Wak Guk Gucci Molak. We waked my mom asking me, KIHTAACHIIMUWAK, take pictures. Iachlita how tasa nawawana namusel. She still thinks we're gonna see a moose. Ni nocham dukkitakika. My grandma said take pictures. Na gukwanawao musel. Then my mom saw a moose. Na moose mitso mi chaskul pamichi anang. The moose was eating grass along the road. Na moose now kona walk pamataki lao gopi tele. The moose saw us and then ran in the bush. Magatak hawiwi na muso. And I didn't get a picture of the moose. Wanapi skaka walk guk o. Nilona wana and the kichi pepe takwik bahna. So when it was almost evening, my mom said, we're almost to Thunder Bay. Now au huchi kiawit lino. I see the sleeping giant. Noawi tonwena and kichi pepe takwik batna. I know that we're almost to Thunder Bay. Nishash tachakalakika ayang. We got there at 7 o'clock. Nilona jiwasani na shuk wala lindamang. We're all tired but happy. Namahlaminan Meechwalkin na Dilchalatna Lakehead School Likanang. We bought some food and then we drove to the Lakehead school. Nawikina Etchion Tele Wunj Gut Kishok. We're gonna live here for 1 month. Watamaguk Mowi Shkolit while my mom goes to school. Niech Dam Ami Minzwi Shkolikan and Anita Hilaniksin Wakata Nawau Hoi Josamak. So he says, I'm going to go to the kids language camp and I'll get to see my old friends. Guk ich watamaloka nakash nilona yontele. My mom will be busy while we're here. Lapich wikayang Sandy Lake House. And we will live in Sandy Lake House again. Jacob witapo mawel nochmo watamani lona shkolikanang dahna. Jacob is gonna stay with my grandma while we go to school. And a pamisiang whiskey weekayang Jacob O. When we were said, Mahani lona weekayang. This isn't our house. Got the noham wiki. I want to go to grandma's house. Jacob machakwi lomo wema oan. Jacob is already missing everyone. Matani, but not me. Noawi ton ni lona ich. Noingao sina watamayon tele. I know that we're gonna have fun while we're here. Noawi ton al kahanayan. Whiskey Josamak Wak. Gume Dahna Lake Helen and Amawalati. I know that I'll make new friends and we always go to Lake Helen powwow. Wakela Ahwalak and Akichi Papa Tuckweek. And I love Thunder Bay. Machkish.
That Anishik Lona, and that was really awesome. It was great to hear the story all the way through at the beginning, and then to go back and go through sentence by sentence. I think a lot of people were commenting in the chat about how great that experience was. One of the things I was really struck by
Yeah.
was the
So when I wrote,
I was really struck by was the I just want to say one of the things that I was really struck by was the intergenerational part of it. That is the ways in which the story you put together is told from the perspective of your older son, Barry, and then also the way it's a journey that was intergenerational, your two sons, your mom and you, and just all of that being woven together. And I wonder if you could comment on that. I thought that was a really neat aspect of the story.
well, sure. So one of the things about the having to write our own short story was that I wanted something that I was going to be able to use possibly in teaching. So if you notice through the story, you see a lot of the Nilonas, ni, all those kind of personal pronouns and things that you don't necessarily have to use because a lot of the time they're already included in the words themselves. But from a learner's perspective, it helps to see those words there to kind of remind them that it's weird that we're talking about us, or they're just talking about themselves and things like that. And that was a really cool experience that I was able to be a part of for 4 summers in a row. And we all got to go and learn together. And the 3rd and 4th summers, Diane came to school with us and lived with some of the girls. And I was the only one who had my kids with me those 4 years. And my mom was fortunate to take most of her vacation in that month so that she could come and watch the kids. And Barry got to meet a lot of the kids from the north and learn a little bit of Ojibwe. So yeah, it was just a great experience that if you're able to do something like that, I go for it. We need to do something like that again, really.
Awesome. You mentioning about how Barry had the opportunity to get to know kids in the North and to be exposed to Ojibwe language makes it reminds me of one of the questions that was in the chat a little bit earlier. How similar is Munsee to Ojibwe was asked. And I wonder if that's something you'd like to comment on, Kristin. I'm thinking especially about the ways in which your language learning has been shaped both by language keepers in the community, you mentioned Diane especially, but also in the university setting. So it's very different environments for strengthening your language. And that comparison of Munsee to other related languages might have been part of that university experience, I guess.
So Munsee and Ojibwe, they come from the same language family, and you can hear a lot of similarities in some of the words. In the summertime, I was fortunate to go visit the Mohican-Munsee Reserve and hear the Mohicans speak, and they sound closer than Ojibwe for some reason. I'm not sure. Maybe it was just their particular words, but it was like everything I could understand. So
We miss you.
Nishik. Konamante. That was one Mohican phrase I remembered. It's kind of like our Kolamalsi.
Yeah, I think that I've seen Ives Goddard write about, from a linguist's point of view, about the close relationship of Munsee language to Mohican, and then of course Wanami. So the language that's also spoken by Lenape people, generally more to the south, and how those are very closely related, in a way that Ojibwe is just a little bit further away, but part of the same family. So that again, that's something that it could be part of these conversations going forward. I'm wondering if any of the language keepers would like to comment on one another or share. A lot of comments in the chat here. Just saying thank you. Matthew Fletcher said, Anishik, Ian, Velma, Kristin, and everyone for sharing our language and your stories. Rhonda said, what a magical experience. Thank you for sharing this with us and such a beautiful example for your son and family. And other comments just on how great it is to hear the language. There's real thirstiness, I think, people feel for the language. Anybody of the presenters want to comment, and then anybody else?
You both did great, Ian and Kristin. Good job.
That was nice to hear both of you speak.
Jeff Kassman is asking a question, and then I see also Darla Stinson has raised her hand. Jeff asked this question. It was asking Kristin, is your understanding sufficient to carry on a conversation? And I thought that was actually a really interesting question because it invites you, Kristin, but also maybe Velma and Ian to talk a little bit more about that experience of being a second language speaker and how can I put it? What is possible at each level of comfort with the language? Maybe you would start, Kristin?
Well, I feel like maybe mine might be a little bit different because I have to speak every day, teaching and having so many classes, and having to read, write, all that stuff. It all plays a part in what comes out, I would guess. And I think that the more you're exposed to it, the more it's gonna internally come out. I'm like, our language has been in our people for thousands of years, and it's only been gone for a generation or two. And I can see, like, the more people spend time on it, it will come a little easier.
Brent Stonefish just said how awesome it is to see you all work together, and I think he's speaking for many in expressing that thought. I want to say Anishik for being here together, and tremendous thanks to the language keepers for sharing story, as Vanessa said, in these different ways. It was really beautiful to hear and to be heartened to go forward and to continue to support this initiative in the best way possible. And Melissa has also added in the chat the Lenape IAS events webpage, and that's another place to keep up with things that'll be coming up in the future. Anishik Lapitchkanawalomwa. See you again soon.
Anishik.
Lapitchkanawalomwa, Nishik.
Lapitchkanawalomwa.